Before today's topic, a quick disclaimer. The stories and data we share come from the states that we practice in and the experiences we personally had, which can differ greatly across our country and certainly the globe. This is not a professional advice show. So get comfy and let's discuss death.
Hello, and welcome to MortMic, a down-to-earth discussion on death and dying. I'm Jem.
And I am Red, and we are your peacefully passing pet protectors this week. So family has many meanings to many people, and most all humanity can agree that this term extends to our furry little friends. We buy clothing for them and toys they'll only ever play in the boxes of. We give them the best kibble and still feed them off our forks, and we have them pose for our Christmas card photos. We hold our pets just as dear as our children. But just like humans, our beloved furry, scaly, and feathery babies will all have to cross the rainbow bridge someday too.
We've been burying our pets with us for thousands of years, even as far back as 4th century BC, when we find tombs specifically dedicated to named animals. On some occasions, when a pet owner died, their loving companion was slaughtered to be buried or burned with their master. Fortunately, today, that isn't the norm, but there are still plenty of ways to celebrate our beloved fur babies once they pass on.
So, similarly to humans, we have the two main subsects, which is cremation and burial. So, cremation is the more popular option. It is about 90% in some areas, which is extremely high, where you consider like human cremation is at about like 60% across the country. So there's a few different types of cremation. When it comes to animals, there is communal, individual, and private. Those are kind of terms that have become more normalized in the pet cremation community. So communal is no return. This is like the mass cremation that happens when, just a bunch of stray dogs or something like from the vet, or people that may not even want cremated remains back are all just cremated in the same retort at the same time. And in the situation of a communal cremation, there is no return of cremated remains to the family at all, because it's just a big commingling of all of the ashes of the pets at the same time. Individual is where they will actually divide the retort with either like metal pans or like little guard walls. So you will be having this like multiple pets in the same retort being cremated, but there's division, so you can mostly get the cremated remains back from your pet. And then private is going to be only one pet at a time in the retort being cremated, so you know that like 99.9% of the cremated remains coming back to you are your pet. So how similar is an actual cremation, like the actual cremation process, when it comes to pets? The same temperature is used. It's a lot shorter than like a 2 or 3 hour human cremation, especially when you're cremating something like a bird or like a little turtle or something like that. It takes way less time.
Yeah, like think about an 8-pound cat compared to like a 250-pound person.
Right, exactly.
Obviously.
You could do the division of hours per pounds essentially for that one.
Mm-hmm.
Pet retorts also have more recessed flooring. When I was communicating with some of the local crematories, pet crematories, I asked a few questions, and they had mentioned that this is something that is more common because there's a lot more fat on animals than humans, which obviously, if you don't have the recessed flooring, it can spill out onto the ground. This is especially apparent because we've been feeding pets human food for so long that they kind of are all obese.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. Aw, little chonky cats are gonna light your retort on fire.
Right. There's also a lot of different styles in the retorts. So like a lot larger chambers, obviously, to accommodate larger communal cremations, or like more burners per retort. For a human retort, it's just the single burner for the most part. So this brings up the bigger question: are you cremating pets in the same retort as a person? And legally, No, you cannot do that. They have to be in separate retorts. However, a crematory can operate, they can have a pet retort and a human retort at the same crematory. But you cannot be mixing the two. It has to be separate.
I was wondering because I feel like that's maybe something that gets asked, like, oh, we have Fluffy's skeleton. Can you please cremate her with our mom? Like, our mom loved Fluffy so much. Is that a thing that can happen or people ask about?
Actually, yeah, I get that question all the time of like, hey, can you add, my dad's dog to his casket, or can you like send the cremated remains with him when he's cremated? I like it's 1 in 10 people, I swear, that'll happen for, that they want their pets' cremated remains to go with them. So that is very much allowed and very common, but they just can't be cremated in the same. I mean, I can imagine that if it was a dog that happened to die at the same time as his owner, we could cremate them together with special permission from the family. But if it's like an unknown, like there's no connection, and like you can't just be cremating like pets and people in the same same retort for no reason.
Right. This is a sidebar. I have a really crazy story, like exactly about this specific thing.
Oh my gosh.
It's a medical examiner story.
Oh my gosh.
So we had an unfortunate car accident case one time, and it was a husband and a wife, and they were an elderly couple. And this actually happens a lot, guys. So listen up. So what happened was that they crashed their car. The car caught on fire. So unfortunately, the remains were pretty burned up. And then when fire and rescue got there, they were like looking through the wreckage, and they found little burned up remains of like a dog. So they're not medical experts, so they just wanted to be sure like it wasn't a kid or something. So they sent it with the couple to the medical examiner's office, and we had to like medically determine that it was actually a dog and like not a kid, which you can tell from like the skeleton, obviously.
Right. Like the skull alone, I mean.
And so what happened was that the families, this was like a blended family. So like one of the deceased, their family was like of a divorced family, and the other one, they got married like later in life. Mm-hmm. So the big question was like, who do we send the dog with? Because they decided to go to different funeral homes.
Oh my God.
But that was just like a funny thing that happened. But yeah, that actually does happen a lot too, is that people are driving distracted by their pets, and then they crash, and we find evidence of like the pet was distracting the driver or anything like this. So just like keep that in mind. Make sure that your pets are always buckled in, guys.
For sure. So something that was really important that most of the crematories and cemeteries that I called for pets tried to stress to me is that there is a difference between like a more private, like mom and pop crematory versus like when you just go to the vet to have your pet euthanized, and whatever cremation service that your vet uses. They're very different things. So the vet contracts with a crematory that usually serves like an entire area, like big area that is going to be doing a lot more of the communal or individual cremations instead of private. Obviously, it's cheaper, and you're just going to be paying the price that the vet upcharges a little to skim a little off the top when they're contracting with this crematory. So not to say that they're doing an awful job at those crematories or anything like that, but just like with humans, the less you pay for something, there's definitely more steps that might be being skipped. And we'll find out a little bit more about this later, but there's no laws when it comes to pet cremation or burial. So you definitely want to look into, okay, well, if you're going to have your vet just cremate your pup, who is it that they're using, and kind of dig a little deeper as to what exactly is happening once you leave your vet. What is happening to your pet? Are they going to be cremated individually, or what exactly the whole situation is? It's good to be educated.
Yeah, and it's good to keep in mind too, if they are using like a community or like a city owned animal cremation place, these guys do a lot of things like roadkill, any sort of like I'm assuming from like the pound or like any sort of thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just definitely if that matters to you and you want all of Fluffy back, you should look into some other options besides that, which is totally fine. So like I said before, I grew up on a farm in a rural community. Practice was when your dog died, when your horse died, when your anything died, you'd go out back, you'd dig a hole, and you'd stick them in there, say a few words, cover the hole back up, and that was it.
Even grandma?
Maybe not grandma. We'll talk about that in another episode. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I think it, and I think this goes, it's kind of like a traditional, like farmers, like living off the land. And I think it still happens with pets, especially with things like, the hamster that dad didn't want you to get, or like the cat that you don't want to pay hundreds of dollars to get cremated. Just like bury it in the backyard. It's free, it's easy, and they'll always be out there if you ever want to think about them or visit them. The thing is, unfortunately, even though it's done, there are hazardous chemicals that we need to be careful about that are in our pets that could leak into the environment and cause environmental damage. It could be a danger to us, people around us. It could be a danger to the groundwater. And there might be some diseases that we don't know about, that we don't know that our pets possibly had, that can make us sick, our neighbors sick, or other animals in the community sick that might, dig up your animals if you don't bury them deep enough. Like I said, these aren't things that we were thinking about back when we were burying our cats and dogs on the family farm, but I know a lot of other people have had these experiences too. Have you ever buried a pet in your backyard, Red?
So, this is one of those do as I say, not as I do things. Because I definitely buried my hamster in my backyard. After putting him in a little shoebox, I left him with, a little bit of his toys and some food, like gave him the
Aw.
proper, Egyptian king burial with all of his worldly goods, and buried him in the
Yeah.
backyard, said a few words, just like you said.
Aw. And that's the thing is like we can tell you not to do it, but people are still going to do what they want to do. So the best thing is like Red did, take a shoebox, take any sort of like burial container, even like a Tupperware is better than nothing. Try to like contain them, cover them with their favorite blanket, maybe put their little sleeping bed in there, some toys, whatever you want to do. I'm not saying that you should do this. I'm saying if you're going to do this, this would probably be better than just sticking them in the ground.
Yeah, it's definitely important to consider. I mean, like Jem said, city ordinances, because that can determine, where, when, how deep, and how far from the groundwater that a body should be. And it's important to think that, if your pet was euthanized, they have pentobarbital in their system, which can stay in the body up to a year and leak into surrounding soil and groundwater. So those are definitely things to think about before doing this. But you can always, wrap in, double wrap garbage bags. I mean, even though that's not very sweet, but it
Mhm.
does the job. It's important to do what's right for your pet, but also for the environment too.
There's also things you can look at, like little pet caskets that you can like buy on the internet or from your local funeral home if they have a dealer. But you can buy like kitty and puppy caskets, like little cute little caskets that are like biodegradable, or even like a casket vault combo.
When I was calling around to the different crematories and cemeteries, one of the ladies, I was like, "Oh, do you have like little caskets for dogs and cats?" And she's like, "Yeah, they're actually kid caskets." And I'm like, "Oh my
Oh, wow.
gosh, all right."
I mean, that's like a double use, I guess. Like I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, if you're burying a baby, it's about the same size as a furry baby, so.
Mm.
And if you're not comfortable with burying in your backyard, there, of course, are pet cemeteries that are available that are actually either strict pet cemeteries, or even some human cemeteries are starting to open up more and more to having pet sections. So those are always options for you. A lot of places are starting to do crematory and cemetery. So definitely beautiful, beautiful parks set aside for cemeteries for pets. So those are definitely options you guys should look into.
So, what are some other things that we can do if we're not comfortable with burying them in our backyard, if our city doesn't allow us to, if our HOA doesn't allow us to? But what if we're kind of against cremation? What if we're against the environmental effects and the cost? Is there anything else we can do with our pets?
So just like with people, there are a lot of options besides just cremation and burial for our pups and cats. So you can consider donating your pet to science. Vets have to know anatomy just like doctors need to know human anatomy. And if your dog or cat had like a very special disease, sometimes universities might want to study that a little bit more to help save other pets so they don't have to pass away from the same disease.
Especially things like cancer or any sort of rare genetic disease. I know that there's a lot of research around this, and you might not be in like the pet research community, but that would definitely be like a valuable resource for institutions like that. Another option similar to cremation that is actually gaining a lot of ground recently is aquamation, or alkaline hydrolysis. We actually talked about this in one of our previous episodes, episode 6, Sci-Fi Your Corpse, where we talked about human alkaline hydrolysis. So if you don't know what alkaline hydrolysis is, you can listen to our other episode, but basically we're using water and chemicals to basically aquify a corpse. This process is actually more environmentally friendly than just straight cremation. So if that's something that you're worried about being environmentally conscious and you still want your pet's remains, sort of like cremation, you can do individual where it's all like sectioned off and you get your pet's remains within the section that they were placed, or you can even do private. And the price with this would range anywhere from I would say like 90, 100, all the way up to 400 it's looking like right now. And that's probably the same cost as cremation.
Yeah, it's around the same as cremation, if I recall correctly, for pets. So one of the specialists that I had spoken with had offhandedly mentioned cloning as an option. There was a client she was serving that was so distraught about losing his pet that he actually had some like Korean company clone his dog for like 50 grand or something.
Oh my god, 50 grand?
Yeah, dude, it's so expensive to clone an animal. And like, you have to consider like, yeah, this pet looks disturbingly similar to your pet, but is not going to have the personality of your pet at all. So I would highly discourage this option.
Yeah, I mean, we could go into cloning for like a whole nother episode, but you know, personality is based on a lot of things, not just genetics, like environment, upbringing, whatever. But it's always interesting to see those articles of people like cloning their pets or like trying to like clone their kids or whatever. I guess I always forget that people actually do it.
Right. It's like that Jurassic Park meme of like we didn't slow down long enough to think if we should, not that we could, you know?
Well, if you don't want to participate in any crazy sci-fi stuff, but you do want to keep your pet around for a little bit longer, there is another option that people honestly do consider, and that would be taxidermy.
This happens a lot more than I think we'd like to imagine, actually.
My mind always goes, I don't know if you guys have seen Scrubs, but their taxidermy dog that they have.
They use as like a footstool, right?
Yeah.
Oh my
and it's
gosh.
actually really funny. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I had an older cat that passed away, and he was so old and decrepit looking. He looked like a taxidermy animal. So all my friends kept asking me, "Are you gonna get him taxidermy?" And I was like, "No." If I saw my dead cat just like hanging out taxidermied on my like fireplace mantle every day, I think I would just break down in tears every morning.
See, that's what I would think too, because I wouldn't do it with a person. Like, it's one thing to have cremated remains sitting on your fireplace mantle, but like to have like a whole animal like in some most likely very strange position, like you know those ones that you find at the oddity shop where they're like in a canoe or playing the banjo or something.
Yeah,
you know?
with like a little hat on.
Yeah, right. Oh,
I'm sure there's taxidermy that's more tasteful than that. So if that's your thing, like definitely go ahead, research that, like more power to you. But that's definitely an option out there for you guys.
So, of course, burial and cremation are the disposition, but we always seem to forget about the services. What kind of services are people going to have to commemorate their pets, either before or after? And there are considerably a lot of people that decide to do this for their pets.
Let's say you want to commemorate your pet's life in a certain way. You know, the practice of having funeral memorializations and funeral services extends to these pets that are within our family. So I think a lot of people often choose to have, you know, a burial ceremony or a service or anything like this that can sort of be a celebration of your pet's life after they die. It doesn't just have to be a cut and clean, go to the vet, go to the crematory, you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially since a lot of pet cremation places are through funeral homes. They already have the facilities to be able to accommodate something like this. Some people want to be present even for the cremations and press the button. The religion plays actually a huge role in what people decide to do for their pets. So one of the specialists I spoke to had mentioned to me that she would have some Japanese families come to pick the bones out of the cremated remains, like the big, large pieces of the bones, just like they would for like their human ancestors. That
Oh,
some
wow.
Jewish families were trying to bury their dogs and cats within 24 hours, which is typical for, human, a Jewish service for a human person. And that even like Shinshu Buddhists would come to do like a yearly ceremony on the anniversary of their dog's passing at the cemetery. So I thought that was extremely fascinating to find that like we take care of our pets like we take care of our humans in a lot of respects.
I was going to say, that is like the sweetest. I'm not a religious person, but that is like the sweetest thing I've ever heard. To extend your cultural customs to these furry little guys living in your house. Like, it's just so sweet to me. Like, it just makes my heart so warm.
Something else I thought was extremely interesting is that you can prearrange your pet's funeral, and not just like go in and check out urns and stuff. Like you can legitimately like pay in payment plans just like you would for a person for a pet's funeral. But something I did notice was humans prearrangements and pre-fund, like the funds that they put into their prearrangements are protected by a third-party company called an escrow account, or they go into an escrow account at a third-party company. But that's not necessarily a thing that pets have. So definitely be, cautious about prepaying ahead of time for your pet's funeral, because those funds might not be protected.
Pet funerals usually don't cost like an arm and a leg, I'm assuming. Well, do they? I don't know.
It depends on how extra you go, I guess, because some people, they might choose bare bones. Some people want to go all out for their babies. I remember just not that long ago, actually, we had a gentleman come to our funeral home, and granted, my funeral home doesn't have, pet services, but he asked us to make prayer cards for his little baby No-No, his little pup No-No. So,
oh, no.
yeah.
That's so cute.
And he brought in like hundreds of photos for our case processing department to like make into a little collage into these beautiful prayer cards. They actually came out really cute. I think I actually shared the picture on our page a while ago, but definitely go check out No-No's prayer cards. They are the most precious thing in the entire world.
That's so cute. Yeah, I think you did share the post to our Facebook page, MortMic Podcast. That's MortMic Podcast at Facebook. You guys should go check it out. But speaking of giving our pets the best, like I said before, I actually had a cat that I recently had to go through all of this with. So the funny story is I was doing my job, so I was out on a scene helping pick up a deceased person, and the son was there, and he was a friend of a friend, actually. So we knew each other like mutually. And he was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with these cats. Like, we don't want them. I don't want to give them to the adoption agency because they're so old. Like, one of the cats was like 18 years old, like this old cat. And me, like, just being there, I was like, well, I'll take him. Like, I'll take the cat. I'll take the cat. And so I actually got my cat from my job, which is like the first funny thing. So anyway, this cat was so old. I literally thought he was going to die like 2 days after I got him. He was like so decrepit. He like couldn't walk. He was just like putzing about, like literally an old man personification, like in this cat. His name when I got him was Smokey, but because he was so old and he was so like curmudgeon-y, I started calling him Grandpa. And it kind of stuck. And Red knows Grandpa. Red met Grandpa before.
Oh, I love Grandpa. I loved Grandpa. He was such a sweetie.
He was, and he, like, true to like form, he was just such an old man, and he was so ornery, and he was like falling apart at the seams, but he lived for a very long time.
Forever.
Maybe it's because like I had him for so long and I did so much to like take care of him and stuff, but he lived to be 21 years old, which is like old for a cat.
Super old for a cat.
Before I got Grandpa, I was like, pets are pets. Like, I don't, if a pet dies, I ever have a pet that dies, like, when I grew up, we would just bury them in the back. But now I live in a city. Like, I'll just get them mass cremated. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, I don't care. When Grandpa died, I was like, we're getting a private cremation right now. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but in my area, we didn't have Aquamation as an option. Like, I didn't really know about it back then. But just when you have these animals in your life, and like, it was just me and Grandpa, like, that was it. Like, we were buds to the end. Like, when you have these animals in your life and they have such a personality, like, I totally understand why people want to do crazy things like clone their animal or like get them taxidermied. So, or like, you know, pay extra money to get them privately cremated so you can have the remains on your fireplace for the rest of your life. But yeah, so that's what I did. I got Grandpa privately cremated, and I went to this really, really nice private pet cemetery with an attached cremation service. And the funny thing is that, like, as a death professional, I went in there and I knew what was going to happen. Like, I knew what was happening, and I didn't tell them that I was a death professional. Like, I just brought Grandpa in after we got him euthanized at the vet, and I was carrying him in, and I called before to get the appointment. And so they were like, oh yeah, like, let's go out to the barn. Like, our cooler's back there. And so I'm just like, okay, like, carrying my dead cat around and following them back there. And they start telling me like the details of the cremation process, which, if you guys aren't familiar, they're not like they're not nice details. But like, this old man was like walking me back to the cooler, and he was like, oh yeah, we can't cremate Grandpa today. We're gonna have to wait a couple days because we need to wait until our stock piles up, so we can we only need to run the retort once a week because it's a little too expensive to run it like more than that. And I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But like, after I like left, like, all of these things that he was telling me, I was like, if he was telling this to like a regular family, like, is this what they tell people? Because like,
Right.
they don't need to know that. And, you know, he was telling me like, oh, you know, Grandpa is gonna go in like by himself, like, which is fine, that's what I wanted. And they're like, and I think you have to tell the families this, but just the way that he told it to me, he was like, and basically it's just going to be all bones left, and we're just going to throw those into the pulverizer. You're going to get your ashes out of that. And like me, like, I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I get it. But then like, driving home, I was like, oh my God, do they say that to people?
That would have been mortifying to be like any other person that just lost a pet, you know?
Oh my gosh. So that was my like takeaway from that. I'm sure there are a lot of like lovely you know, pet cemetery places out there. And it was a great service. Like, they were so nice and they were so compassionate about like what they did, and I really enjoyed my experience. And I have Grandpa on my fireplace right now. He's in this little urn that looks like a cat.
No.
But I was just like a little thrown aback after the fact. I was like, wait, do they say that to everyone? Because they didn't know that I was a death professional.
Right. Didn't you have a funeral party for Grandpa after he passed?
I did that too. So with the services, I didn't have like an actual funeral service. Like, I didn't pay anyone, but at my house, I hosted like a quote unquote funeral for Grandpa. We had like a little this was pre-COVID times. We had a little party, and we had a little candle memorial that we put out on the pond. Like, we set out to sea. Aww. I remember that. Yeah. So that was really nice. But, you know, everyone like celebrates in their own way, and, you know, commemorates pets in their own way. And I think it's important to just like do what you feel is right, and don't feel like you have to like, you know, do the thing that everyone does. Like, the vet will ask you, like, do you want a communal cremation? Like, you can say no, and you can like look at your ordinances, look at your options, figure out what you want to do. Like, it's totally fine.
So it's really important for us to arm ourselves with knowledge going into anything in the death care industry. I always implore everybody before, you know, it's time to have to deal with these kinds of things, to educate themselves. And this is still true. It still holds true for pets. So I had kind of hinted at it earlier, but there are pretty much no laws, like 0 laws governing what can happen to pets like after they pass away. Like where with humans, there's so many laws that are important to be like, okay, well, you have to make sure that every human is identified with like a wrist bracelet or some type of toe tag after they pass away, so you know who they are and like their identity doesn't get lost or something like that. There's tons of little laws like that that are written into legal code, but not for pets. So I thought it was really nice that the International Association of Pet Cemeteries and Cremations and Cremation Association of North America, they wrote up like this nice little document of standards that basically mirror the human laws that we have for cremation. But they've been pushing, I guess, to try to get something instated, but nothing has come of it yet. But I think that's a really nice set of guidelines for what we should be doing. They offer certified pet crematory operator licenses, which is cool. Yeah. So some of the funeral homes I called and talked to, like some of them are actually had been certified in this program. Like you don't have to be, but it's nice to know that like they went the extra mile to show that like they are educated about things and they're in it for all the right reasons.
Right.
I think part of the reason that there's difficulty in creating laws about this is that pets are considered property, where deceased humans are considered quasi-property, and that's a whole lot of legal mumbo jumbo and jargon. But that makes it like they have no rights, and a lot can be done to them after they pass away because they're just in property in the eyes of the law.
Right. So to make that more clear, like the deceased are quasi property. They still have rights as individuals, even though they technically are not individuals. They're deceased people. Quasi property. Pets are property. They don't have rights. Right. I mean, even pets alive have some rights, like, animal abuse laws and stuff like this, but there really aren't any laws regarding like deceased pets, which is interesting.
Right. And there's actually, I mean, you hear weird and unfortunate things about funeral homes and cemeteries all the time, but I was reading up on stuff for the episode, and it like a little clickbait, article came up about a cemetery that was having issues, like the land that the cemetery was on was actually leased land instead of like land that has like a protected land order about it. So that land got sold to a new business. And people that had their pets there were just told, like, you have to exhume your pets or you lose your rights to come visit them and you'll be trespassing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because, yet again, like, this is what happens when there's not laws in place for things like this, that, like, bad things can happen.
It does sound like we're making headway on pet law, though, deceased pet law specifically. So maybe in the future we can see something more like that, because as long as we as humans are still living, we're always going to have pets, like we just are, and they're, pets are going to die too, like we are. So we're always going to be dealing with this sort of thing. I feel like a lot of people have that in common, like as pet owners, having a pet that passed away, even like being a part of like a cat group on Facebook and like posting about like your cat passing away. People are there to like support you and love you. Like straight up strangers are just like, oh, like, I'm so sorry, thinking about you, because this is like a very like real thing that I think a lot of people experience.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just as with grief with humans, people are going to experience like a grieving process with their pets. It follows pretty much the exact same steps as if you're losing like a person. It's what we like to call in the business disenfranchised grief, which I'd like to do an entire episode on in the future. But in this specific episode, it essentially is a group of people or a specific like death that happens that by society standards is like not as important as, losing a human. So it's almost like sometimes looked down upon to be grieving for a pet as hard as you would a person.
And, if you've like known anyone who's really been affected by pet loss, like this is a really difficult thing that, I'll be the first to say it. And I've heard other people say it before. I cried harder when my cat grandpa died than when my actual real life grandma died. Like, I love you, grandma, but like I definitely cried harder when my cat grandpa died.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you have to think about it that you have a pet for its entire lifetime, something that you take care of as you would a child, and have this connection for like pets love us so unconditionally. Like, pets don't do anything wrong either. They're like the perfect beings. Like, whereas like humans can hurt you and disappoint you, but pets are just these perfect little angels that we let into our lives and take care of. So of course you're gonna be super upset about them dying.
I was gonna say your bias is showing.
Oh no.
It's true though. Pets are such an important part of people's lives that own them, and disenfranchised grief is it's a real thing that people deal with, and it's totally okay to be as upset or even more upset if your pet dies as opposed to like a human in your life. I would definitely agree with that.
There's even like grief groups and counseling and stuff specifically geared towards this. So never feel like you're alone or weird for like crying really hard when you lose your dog or your cat or your bird or your lizard or whatever you happen to have at home. Like, they are just as much a part of your life as your family in a lot of respects. So never feel ashamed of that grief you feel from losing a pet.
Yeah, it definitely took me a while to recover from Grandpa, and I still remember him today. I think about him, I think almost every day, definitely. But I do have a new cat now, I know. So it's just part of life, and we'll all get through it. I know you have a cat too, Red. Have you thought about what you're gonna do when she passes away?
Oh my gosh, I will be besides myself when Nyx passes away. She's like sitting on the bed next to me as we record right now. My little guardian cat. She has gotten me through so many life changes that I'm not going to know what to do. So she's going to get the best anything once she passes away. I think I want to have her cremated so I can sprinkle her ashes somewhere. That meant a lot to the both of us.
Definitely, that's sweet.
But any way you decide to do it, our pets were dear companions to us in life, so it only makes sense that we take care of them one last time when they pass to commemorate that life well lived together. Well, that does it for us this week on MortMic. I would like to source one of the books that I took a little blurb out of for some of my research this week, which is Companion Animals and Us, Exploring the Relationships Between Pets and People, and that is by Anthony L. Podbersek, Elizabeth S. Paul, and James A. Serpel. We'd love to connect with you guys on socials. Like, follow, and subscribe to us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at MortMic Podcast. That's MortMicPodcast. It would mean a lot to hear your feedback, so tell us what you think in a comment and drop us a rating on whatever podcast hosting site that you use. And if you have any suggestions on topics you'd like to hear or some burning questions that you might have about death, shoot us an email at mortmicpodcast@gmail.com.
I also want to give a huge thank you to our friend Marson for the use of his song titled Deputies of Death, which he produced just for our show. You can check out his Bandcamp at Marson, that's MARSON, music.bandcamp.com. Thanks, Marson.
So be sure to tune in every other week on Thursdays for some more casual discussions on death. Thank you so much for listening, guys. This has been MortMic.
Bye.
Bye.